Welcome. We're going to get started in just a few moments. Just letting everybody into the Zoom room, so just give us another moment or two. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Thank you all so much for being here today. We're really excited. My name is Sarah Karlinski. I'm the Research Director at the Terner Center for Housing Innovation, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to our webinar today. We are incredibly honored to have Assemblymember Matt Haney joining us today, as well as a really wonderful panel of experts. We're going to start with opening remarks from Assemblymember Haney, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to introduce our panel and my colleague Muhammad. Muhammad's going to give an overview of what's coming out of the legislature this session, and then we're going to have a well-oiled discussion about what all these new bills may mean for the residents of California. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start with our first introduction. Assemblymember Matt Haney proudly represents the 17th Assembly District, which encompasses the eastern side of San Francisco. He chairs the Committee on Housing and Community Development in the State Assembly. As one of the few renters in the legislature, he also serves as the chair of the Legislative Renters Caucus. He has introduced numerous bills focused on housing, homelessness, drug addiction, public safety, workers' rights, and climate issues. Prior to his election to the State Assembly in April 2022, Assemblymember Haney served on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. We are also thrilled to share that he is a Cal alum. So thank you, Assemblymember Haney. We're so glad that you're here with us today. And please kick us off with some opening remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for having me. And thank you to the Terner Center. I am a Cal alum, go Bears, and actually connected to this conversation. I grew up in student family housing, and my mom was a student at UC Berkeley, and so not only is the University of California system one of the best places to attend and receive a degree, it's also a place that many people live and provides housing to, I'm sure, tens and tens of thousands of Californians across the state, including where I lived in the University Village in Albany, which is where I grew up. So it's great to be here with you all today. I am the Assembly Housing Chair and represent San Francisco in the State Assembly. I became the Assembly Housing Chair just at the beginning of this year, started the year off, and then the very next day, our state was hit by one of the most devastating natural disasters we've ever experienced in the fires in Los Angeles. And I think that has lended itself to the tremendous urgency that I am feeling, and that I know my colleagues are feeling in the legislature this year, to take action at every level on confronting our housing crisis, not only to rebuild for the folks who lost their homes in the short term, but we had a housing crisis, of course, as all of you know before. We lost tens of thousands of homes and many millions more who have been impacted by those disasters and others. So we've got a lot of work to do. California, in every poll I've seen, housing affordability is the top one or two issue for residents. We have some of the most expensive homes and most rent and cost burdened residents in the country. Homes here cost about twice what the median does nationally, and that's reflected in the experiences that our residents have. And we know that this is something that has been many decades in the making, and we can't afford to have it be many decades in fixing. We have to move as quickly as possible. And so for my colleagues and what we're tackling, it's really to turn up the volume, to increase the speed, to move faster, because even some of the things that we've done the last few years, many dozens of bills have been passed, and many are incredibly important in terms of new structures of accountability and opportunities for building and reducing permitting barriers. But when we look at that so far, and I've spent time in the first few months as chair, really looking at the impact of bills that have already been passed. Unfortunately, most of them have not yet led to a significant increase in the amount of housing being built across our state. And so even as a lot of bills have been passed, that's not necessarily correlated to the amount of housing units built. And the goal here is to increase affordability for residents, to reduce homelessness, and we do that towards closing the gap of the number of housing units that are needed at every income level. So this year, some of the things that you're going to see from the legislature, some will sound familiar, and then some, I think, hopefully will be able to maybe better identify some of those areas where more work needs to be done. There's still far too many instances of red tape and long timelines and costly delays, I think, that make it a lot harder to build in California than many other places. And the state is engaging in that. There's a whole package of bills that some of which I'm involved with in partnership with my colleague Buffy Wicks around permitting reform, looking at the areas where we can actually reduce those delays, where we can make it easier for folks to actually get housing built, what is actually necessary for the process of applying for housing developments and getting housing developments approved and getting moving. We've got a lot of efforts, including ones that I'm leading, to try to address that. That's something that I know has been taken on by the legislature before, but I think is going to be a bigger priority this year. We're also looking to see where we have passed laws that can be strengthened in some ways, because there are aspects of them where maybe folks are getting around those laws, or there's a lack of accountability in place. I really want us to not just pass more laws, but to actually really assess what is working about what we've already done, some of those laws that are already out there. How can we get feedback from practitioners, from advocates, from folks who are building, and then move forward to try to actually address those issues and sharpen, so we can not assume we have the answers, but be grounded in what's actually occurring with laws we've passed. We've got, I think, big challenges to get the investments in place. There's a big push to finally get a large housing bond on the ballot next year. That's going to be a priority for me and others to get done, to provide also some of the authority for localities to be able to do financing districts and other types of regional efforts to be able to get funding. The reality is that in order for us to address our housing crisis, we can't only make it easier and easier to build, or zoning and streamlining and CEQA and all those things that we're very familiar with, the RENA process. We also have to make sure that we can get the public investments in place, and we're going to have to be a bit more creative about how we do that. So there are a number of bills in addition to the bond, including ones that I'm working on to try to help with that. I think we have to be honest that a lot of these projects that we want to see happen, whether they're 100% affordable or even some balance around affordability, really do need some additional assistance in various ways, from public funding, from the tax incentives that are available, from infrastructure support, in order for them to make sense to move forward. So we're looking at every aspect of this. These are things that we've done before, but I think the themes that you'll see in the legislature today, this year, certainly the focus that I'm taking around it is, how do we make sure that the laws that we've already passed are working, and if they're not working, how do we strengthen them rather than just trying more and more new things? How do we reduce barriers wherever possible to be able to allow housing to get built faster and cheaper? Looking at creative investments and more opportunities for public investment across the state and locally and statewide. And then with all of this, we've got to act with urgency. There's already narratives, I think, that because of the fires, that we need to be building less in some areas, and that we have to actually, pull back on some of the ambitious housing work that we've been doing. I think that is not the right approach. If there are areas that we have to be more careful in, or look more around safety, we should do that, insurance challenges, but that should not deter us from meeting our overall housing goals. And that means we have to move even faster with more urgency in areas that we know we can build safety, like with infill development. So those are some of the things that I think that probably not so surprising, but what we walk into this new year, and certainly for me as the new housing chair, where I'm going to be spending a lot of time and looking for creative ideas and leadership, and also effective implementation of some of the things we've already put out there.
Great. Thank you so much. So I was going to ask you about your vision for California's housing future, but I think you really laid it out in your first remarks around permitting reform. I really loved what you said about looking at, we've passed all of these bills, but are they working? Are they actually delivering the housing that we want to see? And of course, new investments, particularly for affordable housing. I just was going to ask if there's anything else that you wanted to add to that list as you think about sort of your vision and your tenure in this role of what you might want to see.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple things that I think are important to me, and reflecting what I've been seeing and hearing. I think we have to think about financing for housing and what it takes to make projects move forward in more creative ways than maybe we have thought in the past. It can't just be you've got 100% affordable projects, and those are all publicly financed, and then you've got the private ones that have to be at a certain level of return on investment to be able to move forward, and there's really nothing in between. I think we're going to have to find ways to close the financing gap that some of these private projects, mostly market rate projects, have, and some of the things that we might want from those. And that's what I think you see in a lot of places around the world, is you have much more mixed developments. It's a sort of a mostly private, but has some role for the public sector to kind of make it make sense and allow for the tax incentives and other types of support to be able to line up or direct investment to be able to close the gap and get these projects built and meet the need around affordability. So I think that conversation of what the longer term approach to development in terms of the level of need that we have for building new housing, I don't see it being met by just the public sector just writing these checks for $800,000 new units that we're paying for, and the private sector seeing this as enough of a profitable investment to supply the rest of it. We're going to have to be more creative than that. Another aspect of it that I think is going to be a focus for me is our downtowns. I represent downtown San Francisco. We have a huge number of buildings in our downtowns and space in our downtowns all over. I think this is still a great place for people to live. They're really built around transit in many cases. There's still a lot of jobs there, other types of activities and community amenities that are great, and they're also it's an environmentally sustainable and safe way to build as we think about some of the challenges and dangers around sprawl and the environmental issues and natural disasters. Building downtown is a great thing, but we got to make it work. We got to make it make sense, and we have to make it a lot easier to use the buildings that we have for conversions where it's possible. For some of the older buildings, it still is possible. But even we're going to, in some cases, if a building or land in our downtown is not being used for something and we can't convert it, we're going to have to find ways to tear some of those buildings down and build housing there. So over the next, I think, 5 to 10 years, recovery for our downtowns, a reimagined vision for our city centers, for our sort of more urban areas is critical. And I'd really like us to find a way to have a lot of housing be built in those urban areas. And right now there's a lot of challenges and barriers to do that through conversion and otherwise.
Yeah, totally agree. And of course, our downtowns are some of our most walkable places. They're also located near transit. They're just incredibly important for the sustainability of our region. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're incredibly busy, and we just really appreciate you making this time for us in your packed schedule. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And thank you so much to all of you for your work and your leadership. And I know that this is a huge challenge, and to have so many folks who are so interested in it and who are leading on it and who are trying to work through these challenges to actually get housing built to support people's ability to live with them and their families in places that are appropriate and affordable. I can't think of anything more important than that. So please reach out to me in my office if there's any ideas you have or feedback you have, or want to work together, or things you're seeing. We have an open door, and really excited about the partnership with you all and everyone who's on the Zoom today. So enjoy the rest of the panel. You have a great set of folks, and I'm going to get back to work, and look forward to partnering with all of you in the coming years.
Great. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead. That was a great kickoff and really set the tone for everything we're going to be talking about for the rest of the afternoon. And I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our other esteemed speakers today. So first, we have Muhammad Alameldin, who has worked on the policy team at the Terner Center since 2021. In his role, he leverages our research to shape housing policy across local, state, and federal levels. And he has been the key driver on the legislative preview, which dropped yesterday, and he's going to share all about that as soon as I finish introducing the rest of our panelists. So next we have Marina Espinoza as Policy Director for the California Housing Consortium. Marina leads CHC's policy and advocacy efforts in Sacramento. Previously, Marina served as Legislative Director in the former Assembly Majority Leader, now Senator Reyes's office, and as Senior Legislative Analyst for the California State Association of Counties. We also have Holly Fraumeni de Jesus, who has been a partner with Lighthouse Public Affairs since 2018, following 18 years of lobbying at Platinum Advisors. At Lighthouse, Holly was the lead lobbyist and strategist for the Committee to House the Bay Area, or CASA, which led the coalition to pass a package of over a dozen policy proposals aimed at protecting tenants, preserving affordable housing, and producing more housing stock throughout the Bay Area. Nevada Merriman is the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy for MidPen Housing Corporation, where she's held many positions on the real estate development team since 2007. Nevada has contributed to developing over 3,000 homes in Alameda, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties. And we are also joined by Justin A. Zucker, an attorney with Patterson and O'Neill PC. His practice focuses on land use and environmental law. Justice has expertise counseling clients with California Environmental Quality Act compliance, planning and zoning laws, affordable housing laws, water rights, and code enforcement. So we just have this amazing panel today. It's going to be really awesome. And now I turn it over to Mohammed to walk us through the newly introduced legislation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Before I even begin this presentation, I want to give a special shout out to Andres Chavez and Yumna Talot for their amazing work in helping us make sense of all the legislation introduced and for being official co-authors in this paper. To start us off, just a little bit of background. The legislature has 30 new members joining this year. There was also over 30 last year. So about 50% of the new members of the legislature are new members. And we have new leadership for both housing committees. We just heard from Assembly Housing Chair Haney, but there's also Housing Chair for the Senate, Senator Dr. Aisha Wahab. The legislature as a whole is laser focused on solving the housing crisis. And the presentation that the Assembly Housing Chair just gave us really just hit a lot of the themes that we're going to go over in this presentation. But to start us off, we have analyzed and tracked over 220 housing-related bills, one of the highest figures we've ever seen. 60 of these bills are spot bills, so they're up for gut and amendment. So basically major strike-throughs and changes to the legislation. That ultimately means that some major bills are still pending to be released. But for now, we know what bills are being introduced from the legislative preview's cutoff of February 24th, 2025. And there are some general themes. I slated about 10 minutes for this presentation, so I could only cover so much. If you want to learn more about the legislative preview, the paper is available on our website or in the chat below. And the research that I'm referencing could be found in the legislative preview text or on our general website. Next, perfect. So to begin, the tragedy of Los Angeles and the fires that happened there are at the top of everyone's minds. And when examining past fires, the Terner Center last month wrote about various strategies to support housing reconstruction. Increase intergovernmental coordination was one of them. And the legislature has introduced a variety of bills to increase the state response. Next slide. And to prevent and to be prepared for future fires. These are also bills to help with the insurance issues that California is currently facing. Next slide. These bills are being considered to protect homeowners from housing speculation and the financial pressures that they may face post-disaster. Next slide. And these bills primarily focus on tenant protections for residents in the Los Angeles area that will be impacted by a further limited supply of housing. The Terner Center has published work on the gap of data available to help enforce tenant protections, generally in California, and that is something that could be considered for the legislative session. Next slide. And the rest of the bills that we're going to go over is not so much focused on the fires in Los Angeles, but are primarily focused on the whole state of California. The whole state of California is facing a housing crisis. First, we're looking at zoning reforms, and what we're seeing is that there are major reforms to build more housing near transit and to legacy housing bills like Senate Bill 9 and Senate Bill 35. The Center has published extensive research on Senate Bill 9 and Senate Bill 35, and also the idea of transit-oriented development that have recommendations that really resemble what some of the bills that are being proposed, not just on this slide, but also future slides. And now we're going to the next slide. Under consideration, we also see bills that are really focused on streamlining housing in the coastal zone. We've had a paper published last year that really examined like 3 counties and found that in 2 of the 3 counties examined, there was delays in permit approvals for ADUs in the coastal zone compared to right outside the coastal zone. And there are also bills that are really focused on student housing or zoning changes to promote more student housing in areas where there is an acute housing crisis for people that have much lower incomes because they are students. Next slide. And there's also bills on the building codes, which is sort of like this new frontier when it comes to housing research. California's housing costs, especially hard costs, which is labor and materials, are increasing on average about 10% per year. Building code changes are a known contributing factor. So there is a continuous examination by researchers, but also the legislature for the possibility of reforms in this space. Next slide. The legislature is also exploring the intersectionality of the climate and housing crisis with an effort to expand and better categorize exemptions to the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA. In this list includes a bill introduced by Housing Chair Haney, which would streamline the reusage of materials for office to home conversions or to make it easier to build in more downtown areas. Next slide. And there's a continuation of permit streamlining bills. We're really tackling like the soft costs of construction, which is like government bureaucracy, timelines especially. And these bills are really focused on really like setting strict timelines for pre-construction and post-construction. A tighter timeline for housing approvals contribute to less risk for institutions to invest in new housing construction, which decreases overall housing costs. This is also true for subsidized housing, right? The streamlining practices found in Senate Bill 35, which was introduced in 2017. Since then, there has been about 18,000 units streamlined through that bill, with most of them being affordable housing. Next slide. And streamlining isn't all for housing production. For attainable and subsidized housing construction, financial capital is what's mostly needed. As the Assembly Housing Chair has foretold before this presentation, there are some major methods to increase the funding of affordable housing in general by the state of California, from financing bonds and general budget allocations to other reforms to really save money on housing, affordable housing construction. Next slide. There's also a consideration to expand more affordable housing through property tax abatements, which is a popular practice in different states. And you can expect some research on the Terner Center to be released sometime this year about this sort of legislation and how that could contribute to more affordable housing production. Next slide. The legislature is also exploring bills to protect tenants by capping fees and prices and increasing overall housing security. As you can see, the Senate Housing Chair, Dr. Aisha Wahab, has introduced one of these bills that that's under consideration for this year. And it shows that both housing chairs are very involved and want to really start solving the housing crisis for tenants, renters, and also homeowners. Next slide. And when it comes to people who have unfortunately lost their homes, the legislature is exploring ways of which we could, one, increase or change housing to be a part of Medi-Cal benefits, which Professor Carolina Reed of the Terner Center has done extensive work on, but also bills to increase housing for one of the largest populations of unhoused folks in the state of California, which is youth and students, which you could read some of the papers like the 5 Housing Trends in California by Dr. Finnegan as part of the Terner Center to learn more about like these growing trends and to understand sort of like how the legislature is trying to sort of like contain the trends that's happening. Next slide. And state and housing enforcement is also a focus for the legislature. Even after major laws passed in the last few years, we're seeing a continuation of these policies for local accountability. Next slide. And finally, we see another year of which social housing is being introduced with a financial mechanism attached, and also a financial set aside to assist wealth building for residents who are descendants of the formerly enslaved. And next slide. That is all for the legislative preview thus far. These are the bills introduced up to February 24th, 2025. And I am done with the presentation, and I'll pass it towards our esteemed research director, Sarah Karlinski.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. And Mohammed, thank you for all your great work on the legislative preview. It's amazing. And it is in the chat if people would like to read it. So please read it. Please send it far wide because Mohammed and Yumna and Andres did an incredible amount of research to get it ready for you. Okay, let us go ahead and get started with our panelist discussion. So our first question is from on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being like, this is terrible, 10 being, this is amazing. How are you all feeling about the legislation introduced this year? And I am going to start with Holly.
Hey, that's a great question. There's some people may know me. I'm very optimistic when it comes to legislation. And in this particular year, I would put it as a 9.5. I'm very excited. As you mentioned in my introduction, I worked on the CASA Compact, which now feels like a decade ago or 2 decades ago, but it really was just in 2018. And a set of policy recommendations that had passed, and I had a lot of great ideas and big ideas that never passed. And this year, I would just say, because we have 30 new members that are in Sacramento, all care about addressing the housing crisis. And 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. Every new member running for office wasn't coming up to Sacramento wanting to work on housing. Today, the majority of them, it's within their top 2, not 3 areas that they want to work on. So it's very exciting as a consultant lobbyist to have every member asking, what can we do? And like the chair said when he was giving his presentation, we've passed a lot of bills, but like what more we got to do more. So I would say like a lot of this era, people look back and said we've been tinkering around the edges since 2018. And I get excited when third-party validators like the Terner Center and now the Select Committee on Permit Reform, and I've been working on permit reform ideas for over 5 years now. And to have a report get published just a few weeks ago that validates everything people have been saying anecdotally, and really after 6 months of these hearings around California 12 members that were routinely participating and having this report come out and have over 20, like we're having to narrow down the bill package, all the ideas that are coming from this report. It really is, it's exciting. But at the same time, I put that little 0.5 in there on my 9.5 because there's still some unknown factors. We have a new chair, as we just met with Senator Haney, but we also have a new chair in the Senate with Senator Wahab. And I just left a hearing in the Capitol that Marina might have watched, at least if she wasn't there, she watched from afar. But if you went back and watched that hearing, which I encourage all of you to do, it was the first hearing of the Senate Housing Committee this year where the chair was presenting her first bill. And it's taking on and starting to discuss how we define in California what is pro-housing designation. Like, this is going to be a topic of debate because for years it's been based on zoning, permit processing times, development standards, impact fee reduction. Cities have been rewarded for doing good things related to production. And for the first time ever, there's going to be a debate if whether or not there should be rent stabilization and other things considered before we give a city that kind of a designation. And you better believe a lot of cities are already nervous because they enjoy that pro-housing designation and could potentially in rural areas might actually be disadvantaged if things like that change. So I think some of the fundamental issues we've talked about for years will be revisited. But at the same time, I'm very excited with the new permit streamlining package and the work that Buffy Wick, Senator Wiener, and some others are taking on some really bold and big ideas. So I'm excited as I look forward, and I put it definitely on the higher end. Curious to hear what my colleagues on this panel also would rate it too.
Great. Well, Marina, I see you reacting a little bit. Do you want to go next?
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. I think my rating is probably a 7.5 to 8. I do expect it to go up in the coming weeks, as Holly mentioned, with the details around the permit streamlining package coming forward. And I will say, the governor's January budget proposal didn't include funding for housing or homelessness programs, but it did state that the administration would like to work with the legislature on various policies to enhance accountability, promote infill housing, and reduce costs, which I think is really exciting. And I think that the legislature is responding to that, or at least some of the bills that have been introduced align with those goals. And I also agree, a lot of new members are interested in housing, which is really exciting to us. I am really looking forward to seeing the spot bills amended and to see the permit streamlining bills amended as well.
Great. Justin, let's go to you. What's your rating?
I'll say an 8. It's looking good, but cautiously optimistic. Keeping in mind, half a decade ago, we'd only see a few bills per year, if many, and now we're seeing 50 plus, and now we've got hundreds. It's really optimistic, but things are still in flux. Deadlines are still open, got till next Friday. But that said, I'm really excited about what's proposed in the wildfire space. As was mentioned, there's several bills related to wildfire that I'm hopeful will help California move the needle with respect to resiliency and also insurance, which has quickly shifted in the last half a decade from something, that's a small, not even a potential concern, to something that's now an existential issue for many, deciding where they want to live or whether they can stay because insurance is that important. And from the Senate, there's a wildfire package, but I think there'll be a lot of interesting things that are done with codification of some of the recent executive orders, providing exemptions for certain requirements. And sticking with wildfire, I'm really interested and excited to see what happens with SB 326 Wildfire Prevention Plan bill. It sounds really promising. We're still in early days, so not sure what will shake out of it, but anything that's going to help with that, I think, is really awesome.
Great. And then Nevada?
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And I am going to give it a 10 because to be a developer is to be an optimist. And I'm so happy to see the Affordable Housing Bond Act of 2026 introduced, and it will take time, work, and love to build the support needed to see it be successful for next year. And there's just been so many enhancements in the development and entitlement space that we've been able to embrace over these past few years. So increased density and streamlining. And we even saw from Alvarez a clear CEQA exemption for 100% affordable housing. These are major improvements, and we're now bottlenecked at a new place in this in the process. So I'm going to stay optimistic and give the highest number of my colleagues.
Oh my gosh, this is great. Thank you. Nevada, I'm actually going to stick with you and talk a little bit more about affordable housing and the affordable housing bond. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how an infusion of funding, either through the bond or there's also a dedicated budget set aside, how that would assist in financing new affordable housing developments. And ask you maybe just to start there, talking about how these would impact your work.
Absolutely. So I think it's important to note that the bond and other ways to achieve an infusion of funding would provide for a variety of solutions. So rental housing and also homeownership opportunities and supportive housing. We really want to see that kind of broader constituency of housing and needs wrapped up into anything that would happen. But the enterprise report that came out last year states that 46,000 affordable homes in the pipeline await funding. So these are entitled homes where local jurisdictions have gone and done their work to approve them. Anyone who has entitled a project knows it takes 1,000 acts of love from local governments, staff, politicos, etc., community advocates to get it across the finish line. And we have this huge pent-up demand here. MidPen alone, we have over 1,600 entitled homes in 17 projects, and but for this funding, they would have started construction already. So, I think also providing a very stable, predictable source of financing is, in my opinion, a well-funded, rational housing finance delivery system is the number one thing that the state legislature could take upon in this moment to encourage affordable housing developers like MidPen and others to continue to build this pipeline because there's just so much need.
Great. And then do you think that these measures would change the way you approach financing affordable housing, or is it pretty much kind of putting funding just straight into the pipeline in a way that you traditionally fund affordable housing?
I think it's both. It's a both and, really. I mean, in some cases, we work in jurisdictions that greatly vary in their ability to provide local resources. So it would be great for the state to meet places that do not have revenue generators, that may not have an abundance of land already under their control, to really help them move the needle as well, because they too have RHNA goals and are being asked to meet a need. So I think that there's a real equity argument for having more state funding and having programs that can recognize that. I think also, we are trying to really balance this idea of how do you provide maximum public benefit, but also have a viable financing path forward. So we must have both of those things in order to proceed. And it's incredibly challenging because if you want to go deeper on the spectrum to provide permanent supportive housing or help people who are exiting homelessness, you do need more public resources. So I think this particular measure could not only help us really reach folks that are most impacted by the lack of affordable housing, and also help more jurisdictions be able to come to the table.
Great, thank you. Okay, Marina, I'm going to turn to you and just ask, are there any gaps or financing challenges that the funding proposals still miss?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll just say that, the housing bond measures are top priorities for CHC, and we need to get the bonds passed and placed on the ballot. I do want to note that we wouldn't see that funding until 2027. So in addition to doing that, we also need to make sure that over the next couple years, we are securing funding for affordable housing programs through the state budget from the general fund. And we're part of a budget coalition that's requested almost $3 billion for for those programs. And whenever we talk to our members, what they consistently tell us is that we need at least a minimum of $2 billion per year to be able to build. And in addition to all of that, I also want to know on the funding side of things that the legislature is having discussions around cap and trade reauthorization, potential reauthorization. The program set to expire in 2030. And right now there's a 20% appropriation for the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program in there. And we are advocating to maintain that funding in discussions around cap and trade. So we need to protect the funding we have, secure funding through the state budget, and pass the housing bond.
Great. And then one additional question for you, and we'll get to more, but just for starters, legislation like AB 306 would place a 6-year moratorium on multifamily building codes aimed to balance lower costs with safety and efficiency. Where do you see the biggest potential for cost savings in this bill? And do you have any concerns about unintended consequences?
Great question. And this is a bill that was introduced as part of the Assembly's package to respond to the LA wildfires, but it does apply statewide. And we think that this bill is really important in discussions around affordability and the cost of producing housing. You know, we often talk about the need to invest resources to make it possible to build housing, but this is like a way to control costs, because what we've been hearing from our members over the past several months is that whenever they face any like building code changes, regulatory requirements, additional labor requirements, that all impacts the cost of building, which ultimately results in less units being built. And I think what's really important about this bill is that it will it will give developers certainty that whenever they come up with their project estimates for various housing projects, that they won't change, that the standards won't change over it takes years, so over a course of a few years, which could result in increased project costs. In terms of unintended consequences, I know there have been some concerns with this bill around, potentially preventing helpful changes or changes that would reduce costs. And the bill was actually amended last week to, there's now a line in there that says that any changes that would be related to single stair reform could still move forward. I know that elevator reform has also been brought up, and I would say that the author has been pretty open to getting feedback from stakeholders on those types of things, and the bill's moving quickly, but I think there's still time for conversations around any potential changes that could be helpful.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, Justin, we're going to turn to you and talk about everybody's favorite topic, which is CEQA. There are a number of different CEQA reform measures that are up this year. And I'm wondering if you can, I'm going to ask you to explain 2 of them, but the first I think is a really big one, which is SB 607. And this is a bill that would significantly strengthen the CEQA infill exemption. Can you explain to all of us what this bill does and what its impact may be?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. There's a lot to unpack in the limited time we've got, so this is going to be a broad overview. Anyone feel free to connect with me. SB 607 tweaks the environmental review for categorical exemptions in general and also for Class 32 infill development project exemptions. For CADX's environmental review of projects that are disqualified from using a CADX because of one condition is limited in the environmental review to that one disqualifying condition, and environmental review is not opened up for a full review, which can be very costly and time consuming. For the Class 32 infill exemption, it adds a consistency requirement in addition to the general plan and zoning that a project is consistent if it's in line with the zoning designation in the most recently adopted and certified housing element. So think of sites that cities had thought of changing it but hasn't done the upzoning or zoning changes. You can still rely upon that. It removes the substantially surrounded by urban uses threshold, and in lieu it mandates Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation to prepare a map identifying eligible sites sponsors can utilize, and this is going to be a map throughout the state. And it also will establish objective and measurable thresholds for an effect upon the environment to be considered significant for analysis in the Class 32, and as well removes the unusual circumstances exception to using a Class 32 infill exemptions. It has some tweaks to CEQA lawsuits. It limits the standard of review for challenges to NEGDECs and MNDs to whether there's a fair argument that substantial evidence supports the determination, a lower threshold than the substantial evidence threshold. In addition, it also reduces the burden for preparation of the administrative record that needs to be done. This is a really broad bill. It applies not just to housing, and is recognizing that the legislature has limited it, and it does not apply to projects to construct or that is related to the distribution center or oil and gas infrastructure. So it's really trying to keep it towards housing and other infill stuff. But with that, it's a pretty broad bill.
So we've been hearing about infill exemptions. I mean, in the entire time I've been doing land use stuff in California, just 25 years, and like, oh, it's CEQA reform. Is this one going to really work? Do you think if this passed in its current form, it would like really make it so that infill projects are actually streamlined?
I think so. Think of the infill projects. There are so many that, there are challenges that they can't use an exemption. So then you've got to look at it instead of having a full environmental review that can take years. This would be like a focused EIR that you sometimes hear of. And so it could be done in maybe 8 months. And instead of a couple $100,000, it's just $100,000. And all of that adds up. And I do think it will be very impactful. And also the changes to afterwards, if there are lawsuits, the preparation of the record and what the legal standard is.
Great. Okay. And then my second question for you, and we should probably make this one quick if we can, is another CEQA streamlining bill is AB 507, which streamlines adaptive reuse projects. And I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit more about what this bill does and where it might work.
Yeah. So this one is AB 507 is the Office to Housing Conversion Act by Assemblymember Haney, who kicked off the webinar, and it would create a streamlined ministerial pathway for conversions of existing buildings to residential or mixed uses in urbanized areas. So it's again trying to focus on in the cities, the core urban areas. In exchange, the conversions must comply with the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, for preservation of the exterior facades, or if it's received historic tax credits. The conversions are subject to inclusionary requirements similar to AB 2011, that 8 very low, 5 extremely low, or 15% very low for rental, 30% moderate income, or 50% low income. And then there are instances where there could be labor standards included that refer to the Affordable Housing Jobs Act, AB 2011, 2243, and SB 6. And this is a really important bill because it will allow for use on sites, also allow for adaptive reuse construction of new buildings on adjacent parking lots or vacant areas on an adaptive reuse site.
Great. So super important for our downtowns, like our historic downtowns and other areas.
And it has that streamlined processing, 60, 90 days that you see in SB 35-423.
Great. Okay. Holly, turning to you. So we've been hearing about this permit streamlining package and this paper, and there's going to be this package. And what is in this package? And when can we hear more about it?
The question isn't what's in it, it's what's not in it should be the question. If you haven't read the report, the white paper that Buffy Wicks's select committee just published 2 weeks ago, you should. It's about best practices. And again, why I'm excited about the impetus of this package of reforms and ideas that were generated on the road as part of the roadshow. And it was the second one, because even when Buffy Wicks and Tim Grayson and others were in the assembly, there was also a roadshow that the current speaker, before he was speaker, took everyone on and was really listening to the stories. And not just listening to the stories from the developers complaining, but also listening to the stories from the cities that were saying, this is what we already do. So it really is, if you look at the recommendations, it's called best practices of pre-application, best practices of post-application. So even the two bills that Justin referenced earlier on CEQA infill, when you get those exemptions, it happens during the process. So those are part of the package too, because when you get those exemptions approved by the city and they're challenged a lot in court because of the city's action, all of that from SB 330 and zoning, like all of those decisions, it's really everything was on the table during these permit streamlining reform hearings, and all of those things that are viewed where we've got some really great actor cities, other cities are going to have to start acting like some of those other good actor cities and adopting those best practices. So like I mentioned, Justin already mentioned 2 things on CEQA, but I think you're going to see a lot more. And I think you had so many people register for this panel because just last week was one bill deadline. And so many of the ideas have bill numbers, but they don't have the content. So if you're looking for just some highlights, like Assemblymember Haney, his bill is not in print yet, but he's going to be carrying a bill that should be in print any day. And that is 1294. That's about simplifying the housing applications. All the cities have to use the same form and standards for an SB 330 application. It's going to get that same idea with a regular formal application when you apply for your regular housing approval application. You have to have another bill. This bill package also ebbs and flows from 28 to 25 because just 2 weeks ago, the speaker decided to pull and give an urgency clause in AB 253 by Chris Ward, which is allowing third-party review of permit application. So that was one that we thought was going to be in the package, but it actually might get to the governor before there's even a press conference announcing the package. So there's just a lot of these bills and ideas because of the fires. And again, this is maybe where my optimism comes from, because this isn't the first fire that's hit the state of California, and the Senate Pro Tem is in what I consider fire country in Northern California. We've had many, many fires, and a lot of those best practices that were adopted in the city of Santa Rosa during their fire and in Paradise after their fire. A lot of the things that expedite construction are finally becoming popular ideas that even when the state's not on fire, maybe these are ideas that should say permanent and go from short-term to permanent. So that's what we're also seeing is things that are working for the fires, even a Pilar Schiavo bill that's moving on 604 and 304 and 306 on the assembly side that are meant to be just for the fires. If you read the fine print, a lot of those ideas are going to become permanent and not just to try to help build multifamily and the single family homes and the duplex and the fourplexes that burned during the Palisades and the Altadena fires. But you're going to see a lot of those ideas that come out of that white paper from the committee, but they're going to, hopefully many of those are going to become permanent solutions. But there's a lot in there, which I think as a follow-up, Sarah, you could provide to folks, but a lot on that third-party review, also of investigations when they go through before they give you a certificate of occupancy. They're also going to be an opportunity to get third-party review again to try to just cut through a lot of the bureaucracy and red tape and getting projects approved. And hopefully the goal is to expedite and accelerate housing construction. And I'm, again, optimistic that many of these bills will make it to the governor's desk.
I have a parallel question to you to the one that I asked Justin. If we pass, this is another holy grail of housing, getting permit streamlining. If we pass all of these bills as they're currently written, do you think it's actually going to solve the problem, or is it little bites at the apple?
Well, Justin is probably the better person to answer that question. But from what I hear from developers to land use attorneys, they're really confident that some of these ideas can really cut a lot of the red tape and accelerate. There's still going to be some communities that are still subjected to a lot of litigation. A lot of these ideas are really about just the litigation that's sued, that you have to go to court. But even the Department of Justice is the sponsor of a Caballero bill. And the Caballero bill, if I can refresh my memory of that number, SB 808 is going to be one about judicial streamlining to try to make those court actions that are usually in favor of the developer. I mean, usually that the outcome is, but you've lost 18 to 24 months and not very many developers have the money and the wherewithal to make it the 18 to 24 months. So that bill alone, if it's not even in print yet, but it's coming. But we're looking at expediting the judicial review, and that too will hopefully go after a lot of the delays are related to litigation. Not always NIMBY cities, suing against developers, but communities that just don't want to see development, commercial or otherwise. That hopefully it will cut and really not just streamline, but maybe even reduce some of the litigation that really slows things down as well.
Great. Okay. And then we're getting close to the end here, but I'm hoping you could share with the group a little bit more about SB 79, which is around building more housing near transit. And it's an exciting one, but perhaps a wee bit controversial.
Well, we did, and maybe, just 4 days ago, there was a conference. So if you, that might have also been another inspiration for so many people to register for this panel when SB 79's press conference in the Bay Area, Scott Wiener announced it far and wide, and it's all over the Twitter sphere and Blue Sky and all the social media outlets are talking about SB 79. I'm again excited about SB 79 because I'm again an optimist. Because it's really, especially since the public transit agencies are involved and there's a lot of land that goes underutilized near transit. And Sarah, and others know that also we're in not a housing crisis, we're in a transportation and transit use crisis. And I'm really optimistic that people want not just housing near transit, they want jobs near transit, they want to reinvigorate, communities near transit. And even Chairman Haney was talking about downtown revitalization. You can't revitalize downtowns without more incentives to build. And for some, communities in some cities, it's just a matter of time. And I really am optimistic that giving that land use authorities to the transit agencies that own the land and can even protect that land and keep it for the public good in perpetuity for future generations. It doesn't have to be surplus lands. It can actually just be utilized to permit and streamline and try to just get more construction of housing near transit. So yes, it has controversy, as everything does, but the CEQA exemptions are very similar to the many we were talking about earlier on the books. These are infill projects. And I'm really just hoping that this can make it this time.
Great. Okay, we're going to go into our final lightning round, which is what, from your perspective, is the most impactful bill coming out of the legislature this year? And I am going to start with Marina.
For CHC, it's the housing bond measures, and something that's different this year is that we have 2 bond measures moving, one in each house of the legislature. Assemblymember Wicks is still leading in the Assembly, and Senator Cabaldon is leading the Senate version, which I think signals to both houses that this is a priority for members of the legislature. So that's really exciting for us.
Great. Nevada?
I'll offer something new and say I'm excited by AB 804 by Assembly Members Wicks and Stefani, and that would make Medi-Cal housing supportive services a statewide benefit. Many in the affordable housing space are not just developers, but owner operators and also service providers. And we are just seeing this real need to continuously link health and housing policy and health and housing funding. And this would greatly scale up some of the other work we've been able to do through innovations and waivers at the federal government level. And so I am excited to see that and just see where that goes.
In Nevada, much appreciation was given for your optimism in the Q&A. So I just wanted to let you know, if you didn't see that, people were it was very much appreciated, and I appreciated it as well.
Oh,
okay. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, Justin, what's your top one?
Yeah, I really like 607. As I said, it's not just changes to housing, it's across the board. But one of the other bills that I'm really excited about is AB 1143 that would require the Office of the State Fire Marshal to develop a home hardening certification program that identifies best practices for construction and assemblies. This is something that I think could be really helpful because there's the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety that has a wildfire prepared home certification program. Not too long ago, the Chronicle had an article about them, and they only have 50 properties in the state of California that have achieved the top tier. But with that achievement of the top tier of certification, there are corresponding rate reductions. So I think it would be really awesome if AB 1143 could incorporate some of that so that we can get some certification program and reduce the rates for homeowners.
Great. And Holly?
Gosh, that's such a tough question. It's like asking me to choose my favorite child, and I have an only child and a stepchild. So but there's so many bills that I think together are going to collectively have a huge impact collectively. But another one we haven't talked about, just because I am, as many of you might know me from ministerial housing project approvals, and SB 677, another Scott Wiener bill, that's gonna, again, close a lot of loopholes and challenges that individual applications have had for SB 9 project applications, as well as SB 35, 423, and really just trying to make those tools that are on the books, projects compliant with underlying zoning, just try to get them off the ground faster. And then with Marina's bill, with some extra funding and finance tools on the books, and Nevada's dreams of getting more financing tools on the books, Cortese has another bill to help with getting below interest rate construction loans. And maybe with a combination of the financing and the policy, we can finally launch California where it needs to be in accelerating project approvals.
Awesome. Well, folks, we're right at 4 o'clock. I just want to thank all of you so much for joining us today, and thank you to our panelists, and thank you to Mohammed, and thank you to Assemblymember Haney. It's just been a great conversation. We will post a recording of this webinar on our website and send the link to you in the next few days. Thank you all again so much for participating.
Thank you.